చెక్ చేద్దాం. కూర్చోండి, చెక్ చేద్దాం.
Thank you. Good morning. Today's class is about compartment syndrome. How do you diagnose a compartment syndrome, and what will be the clinical features, and how do you manage? Compartment syndrome is one of the uh, common complications, and you should know about this. Every trauma surgeon should be aware of this complication occurring in any of the injuries. So it's very common, and if you don't identify this in time and treat properly, then the results are very grave. So patient will have lasting complications, and he will not be happy with you, and we ourselves will not be happy with our performance here. So you should be aware of this complication, and it can occur in any of the injuries. That is the most important thing. Yeah, last week we could not take the class because there were exams going on. You know, these exams, as a medical student especially, any exam was a burden, a tedious thing for us. But in life, like marriage, exam is a necessary evil. That's my personal view, don't get me wrong. Okay, so you guys, once you get through your degree or PG, the exams are done. You are done with your exams. But for us in teaching profession, it's not like that. So every year we will be having UG exams, PG exams, and personally I feel that they are exams for me as the internal, rather than it is exam for the student. For a student, it's only for himself, but as your teacher, I need to go through the problems day in and day out throughout the duration of your exams, and hearing your answers, and every time it's like a revelation for me. My eyes open with new knowledge. The amount of knowledge you guys impart to me is much more than what we try to put into you. So yeah, it's a very good situation to be in. On one hand, with the answers you are telling, the look in the external's face, and that incredulous disbelief on his face looking at us, and I think you are the teacher who taught all these things or something like that. I feel a bit yeah I don't want to see my show my face to him, see him in the eye, but sometimes it will be a pleasure hearing your answers. Even last week, yeah, we could learn, even after being in the department for say around more than 20-25 years, both of us, even the external examiner, could learn something from you guys. So thank you very much, and that is the one which keeps us going in this profession. Even after all these years, we are trying to teach you on one way, and yeah, we are learning from you guys. So keep doing it, and keep our spirits up, and I'm looking forward to your exams as well. Okay, so let's jump into the topic. This is compartment syndrome. Let us see what it is. Here, all of you know that there are some airtight compartments in forearm, leg, or something like that. Here, it's a limited place, and a lot of structures are there inside. So the nerves are there, the vessels are there, arteries, veins, everything. So you all know that the veins are thin walled, whereas arteries are like us, they are a bit thick walled, because their function is different. Rain or shine, they need to pump the blood. So they need to have that muscle coat, and they have to work against so many arts. That's why they are a bit thick walled. So in these cases, whenever pressure inside a compartment increases, then it is the venous return which is blocked first. The veins are blocked first because they are thin walled, and once the venous return is blocked and arteries go on pumping blood, a point is reached where the blood will stop flowing. Okay, that is the time when all things will go bad from worse. So compartment syndrome is supposed to occur at that place. So as we have seen, there will be increased pressure inside a closed cavity. Like there is a saying in Telugu, if even if a cat is imprisoned in four walls, and if you go on increasing the pressure by teasing it, it will become a tiger. Similar thing will occur here with elevated tissue pressure. Then there will be tissue perfusion comes down. There will be hypoperfusion, which will lead to ischemia. And as all of you know that ischemia, that is a prolonged loss of blood supply to a part, will lead to necrosis or gangrene. So if this chain of events occur, then definitely you need to intervene as early as possible. That's why this is one of the true orthopedic emergency conditions. So this is a lecture prepared for postgraduates and during one of the conferences. So I think there will be a lot of irrelevant things for you, but just go with me, because history is also very, very important. How people came to know about this condition. Even with all the teaching aids, it is very difficult for us to read about them and to remember about those things. But just imagine, say in those days when not so many facilities, not your WhatsApp or your internet was there, people used to work offline. Can you imagine a thing like that? Yeah, it's very difficult for you guys to comprehend what it was before the era of internet. So, but people were living at that time, people were doing their things, going about their life, having a normal life, happy life. And on the other hand, they invented so many things which we take them for granted right now. So Volkmann, all of you know that Volkmann ischemic contracture is one of the complications after compartment syndrome, and this is 1881. I remember this very well because when I was a postgraduate, in one of my question papers in final year MS Ortho examination, Volkmann ischemic contracture was one of the questions, and at that time, unfortunately, I read about it, and once we know something about that, then I think the examiner is gone. So I filled most of the papers with that, and the examiners at that time, the external examiner used to correct our papers, and unfortunately for me, there was one Volkmann ischemic contracture which was kept as a short case. So he went on asking me everything about that, and after maybe around 2 to 3 minutes, my stock got exhausted. I finished my quota. Whatever I read about it is gone. Then the examiner was going on asking about this. Then I was a bit worried. What's happening? I did the long case well, so I was a bit confident that yeah, MS, I am going to get my MS. Maybe I got my M. S was a bit after short cases, maybe. So when that guy went on asking, and I couldn't answer maybe last 3 or 4 questions. Then looking at my face, he said, don't worry, you did well. Because you have written very well about this topic, I was just asking you, no, need not worry too much about this. So I remember Volkmann, and I remember this 1881. So he was the one who first had an inkling that there could be something wrong when you apply a restrictive dressing very tightly to an injured limb. There are so many things which can occur which will lead to ischemia. Later on, so many people dwelt on it, and this man was the first one to use Volkmann, because Volkmann was a bit hesitant. He was unlike today's leaders. So today's leaders want tomorrow's glory also today. They want to know what people will think about them tomorrow. They know that. So to obviate that, they want to have their statues and some good things written about them today itself. So, but Volkmann was not like that. So he didn't name it by after himself, but the other guys who followed him named it after him, because he was the first one who recognized and wrote something about that. And these are some of the publications about that. And Murphy was the one who suggested how to manage this case. Fasciotomy is a simple surgery which can relieve this condition. And Ellis is another one who in 1958, recent past, maybe around 50-60 years. So he said that tibial fractures are a common cause. And Seddon, all of you know, Seddon, the name is associated with nerve injuries. So these are some of the pioneers who have done a lot of work in this regard, and at least you should know their names for now. So coming to the etiology, how can it occur? See, there are only two things. Because this is an airtight compartment, anything which reduces the size of the compartment or anything which increases the size of the contents of the compartment will lead to pressure. So this is very simple here. So what are the things which can decrease the size? A tight dressing or bandage or a tight plaster, if you go on tightening that, then definitely it will lead to increased pressure inside a closed cavity. Initially, when we started applying the plasters, in our enthusiasm, we always used to put it a bit tight. Otherwise, what will happen, if it apply it a bit loose, then it will slide down and you have to redo that again. And when we were doing postgraduates, we used to have a lot of patients. That means we used to do close to around 50 to 60 plasters every day. So just imagine doing it twice or thrice on a patient. So there was a tendency for us to do it a bit tight so that it won't slide, and we need not redo it again. But we were warned that if you do it too tight, then it may lead to compartment syndrome and you need to do a fasciotomy. So instead of a simple plaster, you end up doing much more to a single patient. Just imagine if that happens to 4 or 5 patients every day, then 24 hours will not be enough. So initially only we were taught about this complication. So we were a bit, we know what will happen if you are not careful. So tight dressing can cause it, or any localized external pressure. Sometimes if you put a plaster with something inside, if you are not careful, some coin or some injection bottle was there once. When you are doing this for kids, usually they may just keep something inside, and if you don't see that properly, then if you go on plastering, that will produce a localized pressure. Or if before the plaster sets in, if some pressure is applied by hanging it on a table or a chair, there will be localized pressure which may lead to decreased compartment size. Or sometimes some facial defects which are naturally occurring, if they are closed by pressure, then that will lead to decreased compartment size. And the commonest cause of increased pressure inside a compartment apart from external pressure is from internal, that is a bleeding. A fracture can bleed, or a vessel injury which is not noticed can go on bleeding and leads to a hematoma which will put pressure and it will lead to a compartment syndrome. Or if there is any bleeding disorder which we are unaware of in a patient, then it will slowly go on bleeding and it will lead to a compartment syndrome. So whenever you apply a plaster, your job is not done. Actually, your job starts from then. So once the plaster is applied, you need to check vascularity repeatedly. If you do it immediately after the plaster and ask him to go home and come back after 6 weeks, you are gone. So you need to review it periodically. So the best practice is to ask him to come day after within 48 hours. So any of these problems, if they are there, you can easily identify and do something about it. And if there is some increased permeability, see, when there is pressure, there is ischemia, and when there is ischemia, there will be increased capillary. So this is a vicious cycle. So you need to break it sometime. somewhere. So to do that, at least you should know. So these are some of the conditions where there will be increased capillary permeability. That means blood oozes out of these capillaries very easily. Ischemia, trauma, burns, exercise, snake bite, drug injection, IVF, all these conditions can lead to increased capillary permeability. This is for completion's sake. So you need to remember this slide and write it down. So other things can be a fracture, which is a closed fracture. Any closed fracture is a potential cause for compartment syndrome unless you are very careful. And blunt trauma, because point pressure will be applied there, and temporary vascular occlusion, which will lead to anoxia, capillary permeability, cast dressing. So all these things, just make a note of them. Coming to fracture. So fracture, all of you know that is the commonest cause for this compartment syndrome. Here, compartment syndrome is around, incidence is around 10% in all fractures. So whenever you get a fracture, so out of 10 fractures, one will definitely can go for compartment syndrome on its own. But if you are not careful, more than that can give rise to compartment syndrome if you are not careful. So you should be very, very careful and minimize the incidence of this compartment syndrome. And this is directly proportional. The more the injury to the soft tissues, the more will be the incidence of compartment syndrome, because this is a common sense. Because if the soft tissues are also involved and if there is a fracture to boot, then you will have a soft tissue injury which can bleed and a fracture hematoma which can help in the formation of a compartment syndrome by increasing the contents and pressure in the closed cavity. So whenever there is a comminuted fracture or whenever there is a contusion over the fracture, so you should be doubly careful. And whenever, just because it's a open fracture doesn't mean that they will not go into compartment syndrome, because open fracture, as you know, the skin is not intact, but the high energy injury. So apart from bone, lot of soft tissue damage will also be there. So the more the soft tissue damage, the more the incidence of compartment syndrome, as we have seen previously. So this can occur even in compartment, even in open fractures. And blunt trauma, as you know, even without a fracture, a blunt trauma, a contusion to soft tissues which will bleed into the compartment, can also lead to compartment syndrome, and it is the second commonest cause after the fractures. So whenever, especially these sports injuries, they are notorious for that. So patient will, once you get an X-ray done and see there is no fracture, don't try to relax. You have this at the back of your mind and go on clinically examining the patient, so that the earliest sign you can catch hold of it and start your treatment, and you will have a good result. So what is the pathophysiology? How does it occur? So there should be a measurement of normal tissue pressure. So inside the cavity, there it will be around 0 to 4 millimeters of mercury. The normal blood pressure is around 120 by 80. So you can have an idea, the normal tissue pressure is around 0 to 4 and it will increase with exertion. As all of you know that when the muscles go on contracting, the blood starts pumping, then definitely along with the increase in heart rate and blood pressure, even this normal tissue pressure inside the compartment will increase. And they say that once it reaches 30 or 45, there is the lowest point is around 30. After 30, you should have the red flag should be up. Oh, so this is may go into and compartment syndrome. And if it reaches 45, then definitely you should take measures to reduce that tissue pressure from 45. So once the pressure increases in the compartment, say more than 30, then there will be changes in the structures which are present in the compartment. The commonest one which occurs there is a muscle. So a muscle can go anoxic maybe up to 3 hours. It can tolerate, it can go hungry maybe up to 3 hours. But from 3 to 4 hours, the changes which occur there will become reversible. But after 8 hours, the changes which can occur, it cannot survive without permanent damage after 8 hours. So the period is 3 to 8 hours. If you can start your treatment and do the effective treatment within say around 6 hours, the golden hour, that's why most of the structures can stay up to 6 hours. That's a nature's gift to you with minimal complications. If you can intervene in that period, I think you can get away with very minimal complications. But if it is more than 8 hours, then you will see irreversible muscle damage. That means there will be anoxic changes, muscles fibers die and they may become fibrotic, and there may be some contraction. So many things will occur there. Then coming to the nerve is more delicate than muscle. All of you know that. So after 2 hours, it loses nerve conduction. So the nerve impulses stop inside after 2 hours, and there will be neuropraxia. Neuropraxia is the first one of the nerve injuries. And after 8 hours, even in the nerve will have irreversible changes. Then how do you clinically know that there is compartment syndrome? Previously also we have seen that 5 P's or 6 P's depending upon your perception, there another P for you. Okay, so there will be pain out of proportion. Yeah, agreed that you have a soft tissue injury or you have a fracture, there will be some pain, but the pain with which the patient is presenting is out of proportion. That means patient was injured, patient had a fracture, and you have put a plaster. So once the plaster is put, then some amount of pain comes down, because the pain is because of mobility at the fracture site. So mobility is taken care by your plaster. So if the mobility of the fracture site is not there, most of the pain should come down. But here, without even with the plaster on, the pain here is out of proportion. That means it's more than what it should be. And maybe once you take out the plaster, you can see very tense compartment. Usually when the forearm, if you palpate, usually it is soft to touch. But once compartment syndrome sets in, it is very tense. Like we will become tense before the exams, as I become very tense before your exams. Okay. Then coming to the most important and pathognomic sign is pain with passive stretch. So whenever a patient has fracture, and if you ask them to move the fingers, there will be some pain because it is moving actively, and the injured structures will be a bit painful and they are resistant to the movement and they cause some pain. But in compartment syndrome, the pain can occur even with passive stretch. That means if patient is not moving, you just extend the fingers. If there is a fracture of both bones, forearm, and if you suspect a compartment syndrome in the forearm, you just extend the fingers passively by yourself. You don't ask the patient to do it, but you do it yourself. Even with you doing it, patient will have pain out of proportion to his injury. Then that means definitely there could be a compartment syndrome. Then you put your manometer inside. How we do that pressure checking, how do you measure it? We'll come to that later. But pain with passive stretch is the most important clinical sign. Then paresthesias and hyposthesias may be there because of the nerve involvement. And if it is permanent, that means if you leave it for too long, then it may lead to paralysis of that those muscles. And pulselessness will be there because the arteries are also obstructed, and pallor will be there because once blood supply is cut off, then the limb will become pale initially, then maybe become blue later, hypoxic. Then one more P is poikilothermic. That means it becomes cold. You can feel the limb is a cold. It is very cold to touch. You should always test with the opposite side. So these are some of the P's which are very, very important for you to make a diagnosis of compartment syndrome. This passive stretching, that's what it is. Pain, most important, and passive stretching. Other ones are pallor, pulselessness, paralysis, paresthesia, appear late, and you should not wait till that time. So just because they are not there, only pain is there, you should not wait till all those things to occur for diagnosis. Okay? Once you make a diagnosis, because you have seen that the patient has pain on passive movement, then start your treatment. Don't wait till all the P's are seen, then it may be too late. And some of the clinical conditions where it will be difficult for you is sometimes if the patient had a epidural anesthesia, then patient may have an altered sensation and all, so he may not be able to completely cooperate with you. And sometimes the nerve blocks may be there for surgery. So even with some nerve blocks, the nerve conduction or this sensory perception may be a bit altered. So you need to give allowance for those things also before you diagnose this condition. And controlled intravenous opiate analgesia. This is one condition which can make diagnosis a bit delayed. So other differential diagnosis, arterial occlusion, it's more or less mimics, and I think you need to open up the compartment and do something for the artery which is damaged. So this is much more grave than the compartment syndrome. And if a peripheral nerve injury, you will have these altered sensations and you may be misled that a compartment syndrome may be a peripheral nerve injury and don't do the needful with the disastrous complications. And a muscle rupture can also mimic compartment syndrome, and it may lead to compartment syndrome if the muscle is a big one and the rupture is more and the bleeding is more. Then you need to do what is known as a pressure measurements. Once you measure the pressure inside the compartment, then definitely you will have an objective evidence that definitely a compartment syndrome is there. The clinical examination is a must, and you have an objective assessment by measuring the pressure inside the suspected compartment. So here these are some of the things which are needed to measure the compartment pressure. They have a manometer, saline, three-way stop clock, some catheter to pass it in. All these things are embodied. And Stryker is a medical device company. It's a multinational, and it provides a kit for this. And Stryker is more famous for providing implants for total joint replacements and plates and nails for trauma management. So Stryker is a very well known name which supplies medical devices, implants in orthopedics. So this is a simple diagram which shows the things which are needed to measure the pressure. I don't think you need all these. This is PG stuff. You know that you need a manometer, a needle, a three-way stop clock to measure the if you know that you can measure pressure inside a tissue compartment, I think that's more than what we bargain for generally for the exams. So when it comes to measuring the compartment pressure, you need to measure in all the compartments. That means in leg you have around 3 to 4 compartments. So it's not enough if you examine one compartment and leave all the other ones, because it may be present in all the compartments. Okay, so once you test for anterior compartment, you have found the pressure high there. You should not feel that gotcha, I had I made a diagnosis, its pressure is more in the anterior. It could be more in more than one compartment. You never know, because the same injury can lead to increased pressure in more than one compartment. So it should be done in all the compartments. So this is how this is. Most of you can recognize that it is a cross section of the leg. You can see the big one, tibia, and smaller one is fibula. And the beauty of fibula is it's surrounded by muscles. So it is usually we used to think that it's mainly for muscle attachment, but nowadays they say that is apart from muscle attachment, it is also very important in weight bearing as well. So here you can clearly see there are more than one compartment. One is anterior, one is lateral, one is posterior, superficial, posterior, deep posterior, and you have seen that they have a clear boundary, and there is bone at one end and a facial compartment. So they are all inelastic, so they cannot expand beyond a point. So if the structures go on expanding, then definitely there will be compression. So if you remember this diagram, then the pathophysiology of compartment syndrome and how to measure the tissue pressure inside a compartment becomes very clear with this diagram. So if the compartment pressure is definitely high, so that is unequivocal, that means you are definite because the findings are there and the pressure is more, then directly you can go to fasciotomy. But if it is equivocal, that means you are not sure because patient has only minimal symptoms and your pressure readings are not so high, then patient may not be alert or it's a part of polytrauma. So then you need to do repeated pressure measurements. Then definitely if they are more than 30 millimeters of mercury, then you go on doing serial examinations. They are within 30 millimeters of diastolic blood pressure, that means it is more than 40 or 45, which you have taken as a cutoff mark, then definitely go ahead and do fasciotomy. But if it is just around 30 to 40, 45, then before you put your knife in, just do serial examinations, and if you feel the patient is more symptomatic or if the pressure is building up, then definitely go for fasciotomy. So what are before you put the knife, there are some things which you can do by giving medical management. What is a medical management? Here there are some things which you need to see. Then if the patient is normotensive, that means if the blood pressure is high, try to reduce the blood pressure. Once the patient becomes normotensive, then definitely the perfusion pressure comes down, which a tight bandage, then definitely you need to take them out and maintain the limb at the level of the heart. So all of us know that because it will reduces the arterial inflow, so venous outgo will be more, so the edema will come down. Okay, so supplemental oxygen administration can help because this is a hypoxic condition. And once cast is removed, then there will be drastic reduction in the pressure inside a tissue compartment. That may be all that is needed to reduce compartment syndrome incidents usually. And it's not enough if you split it, you should spread it and take it out. So there are a lot of benefits by doing this. And once the patient comes to you with emergent compartment syndrome, as we have seen, remove the cast and do not elevate but keep it at the level of the heart, and be ready, do all the investigation labs and all to make the patient ready for surgery if needed. Then if possible you can do it at the bedside procedure if it is an emergency, or you can wait with all the medical treatment which we have seen previously. You take all of them, then you prep the patient for keep them ready for the surgery. So here the main treatment here is fasciotomy and fasciotomy, because that is all that is needed to improve drastically this complication. So you should not expect compartment syndrome in your patients, but if it occurs, you should be the surgeon. You want to do this surgery because here the results are much more. It's a simple surgery, but the results are enormous. That you are saving a limb, so the job satisfaction will be much more. Last time we have discussed that the amputation is a thankless job and most surgeons shy away from doing that surgery. But in comparison with that, this fasciotomy which you do for compartment syndrome is definitely it gives you a lot of job satisfaction. But the only thing is you should do it in time. If you do it once all the components in the compartment are already destroyed, there is no point doing your fasciotomy then. So the thrill is to follow the patient, examine him serially and suspect that this patient could go in for compartment syndrome and go on serially checking him throughout the night and take him up for surgery in the morning and do it off. Then once you are coming off the duty, you feel you are on top of the world, that you have saved the mankind from a catastrophe. But definitely it's a good feeling for you to have because you have saved that patient from amputation. Because compartment syndrome can lead to serious consequences. One of them may be a gangrene or a muscle injury which will lead to contractures and useless limb, and ultimately it may end up in amputation. So if you keep your eyes open during the management of these fractures, then you can you can definitely diagnose this compartment syndrome and can treat it with all your might. What all is needed is fasciotomy. But remember that all the compartments need to be open. We have seen in the cross section of the leg that there are medial compartment, anterior compartment, and superficial and deep posterior compartments. So if you find increased pressure in all the compartments, you need to do fasciotomy in all the compartments. It's not enough if you do fasciotomy in one compartment and leave the other compartments without reducing the pressure. So once you have done the fasciotomy, then the pressure is released and the muscle bulges out of the wound. So they say be liberal with your skin incision. Previously what they used to do is they used to give a small nick in the skin and they used to cut the fascia too long inside. So the muscle used to bulge out of a narrow opening in the skin. So it was like once you see that atom bomb being dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, you see that mushroom shaped cloud. So something of that sort used to come. The skin opening is very less, but the muscle which has come out of it is like a balloon structure. So after some time, if the neck is very narrow, it may go in for necrosis again even after your fasciotomy. So then we used to give be liberal because anyway that's not our skin. So go ahead and give a liberal incision, skin incision, and open all the facial compartments. You should. If there is a fracture inside, it's not enough if you do fasciotomy and leave it, because if the fracture fragments are immobile, if they are not immobile, then they go on bleeding and may recur. So you need to take care of the fracture by stabilizing, and you can do it by means of an external fixator like in this picture, or you can put in a IM nail, whichever is easy and whichever is mandated in that particular case, you should do it. And when you want to do fasciotomy, just because you know how to do fasciotomy and you have the patient with you and you have the knife in your hands, don't go and do the fasciotomy, because once you open the skin and once you open the fascia and once a muscle is exposed, then it becomes something like a compound fracture, and definitely the chances of infection are much more. So then you can ask me, then why do you want to do fasciotomy when the chances of infection are more? So you can control the infection provided you have the limb. If there is no limb, Unless you do fasciotomy, the compartment syndrome cannot be controlled. If there is no control of compartment syndrome, you won't have a limb. So to save the limb, we don't mind patient getting some infection. And even if we get some infection, because we are forewarned, we are forearmed. So definitely we will start our antibiotics, we will do our debridement and see that the incidence of infection is limited. Then that's why a fasciotomy should be done ideally once all these factors are present. So unequivocal clinical findings, definitely clinical examination and pressure measurements, if they say that it is there, then definitely go ahead and do it. And if the tissue pressure is rising, serial leadings, if you see that it is rising, that indicates there is bleeding inside or something of that sort is happening, then go ahead and do it. So these are some of the indications for fasciotomy. And what is the contraindication? So if you have missed it, you admitted the patient today, and because you are busy, you didn't examine him during your duty, and once your duty is gone, you are out without handing over or to the next patient, next surgeon or something like that. So being a doctor is not like other duties. So when you are on duty, you should keep your eyes and ears open, and even when you are coming off the duty, you should examine the patients once again, and you should hand them over to the person coming next. So it's not enough just you call him and say, so bed number 1, 2, 3, these are the things, you just take care, I am going 3 hours early. So don't do that. So before you go, see that some suitable instructions are given to the person who is coming next, so that these things will not be missed. So if you miss the compartment syndrome for a day and you come back after 2 days and find the compartment syndrome, then simple fasciotomy may not be enough. So don't do fasciotomy at that time after 2 days and think that everything is hunky-dory. No, it won't be, because by then all the damage must have been done, and simple fasciotomy may not be the answer for compartment syndrome after 2 days. So that is the main contraindication for compartment syndrome. So what are the principles? So every surgery will have some things which are needed before you put your knife. So here early diagnosis is a must, and as I told, long extensile incisions. So as I think I keep on telling you repeatedly that in Bailey Law, one of the famous footnotes for me is big surgeons give big incisions. So I don't know what that big surgeon means. Is it having a BMI of 35 or 40, or being big in the hierarchy? The higher you are there in the hierarchy, the bigger incisions can you make. But unfortunately now, because of this, all these keyhole surgeries and increased awareness about the aesthetic part of it, we are making do with only keyhole incisions. Because one of my professors used to say, watching from keyhole is much more interesting than going into the room with the doors open. I don't know what it is, but we need to go here with long extensile incisions, right? So release all facial compartments, as I have told you repeatedly. This is a must. This is the most important thing in fasciotomy. Release all compartments. If you leave behind one without opening, that may be the cause for compartment syndrome later. You may be satisfied that I have done this surgery, yes, fine. You may be smug, and you may not be following the patient because you have done what is need to be done. But unfortunately, because you have not opened one compartment, that may be the cause for this compartment syndrome, and the contents inside that compartment may land up in trouble, and thereby they will cause the disability to the patient. And once you do this, apart from fasciotomy, you should examine the contents which are there inside. And if you find any necrotic debris, that means any muscle which is dead, then take it out. There is no point to leave the dead muscle inside, because we have already known this is like an ice cream for the microbes. You are inviting the microbes with goodies, a bag of goodies. If you leave a dead muscle inside, and close the wound or leave it open, then you are asking for trouble. So whenever you see any necrosis, be merciless, do debridement and cover within 7 to 10 days. Once you open that, then muscle comes out of your wound. Then you need to provide some skin cover, because as I told you, it will become a simple fracture, will become a compound fracture. So you have to make a cover for that muscle. So you need to provide a cover, and once you wait for a week, once all the symptoms of compartment syndrome subside, then you go ahead covering by whatever means. It may be a simple thin split graft, or a thick graft, or it may be a flap, or whatever, or a free flap, or whatever is needed. You should do it within 7 to 10 days. If you don't do it within that time, then this may become infected, because once it is outside, then the infection takes over, and what all you have done till now will go waste. And lower leg, as we have already seen, 4 compartments: lateral, anterior, superficial posterior, deep posterior. And for you, I am telling you, this can occur anywhere in the body, even in the skull. So it can occur in the hands, occur in the foot, leg, forearm, arm, anywhere, even in the skull it can occur. So perifibular fasciotomy. So this is a PG question. Whenever if you have multiple compartments are involved, what do you do? So I cut the fibula at that point. So if you do that fibulotomy, then once you cut the fibula, because fibula is attached all around, you can see it here. See, this is one compartment. Fibula is the one which is in touch with all the compartments. So this is one compartment, this is the other one, deep posterior, and this is the superficial posterior. So once you cut fibula, then all these compartments will be free. So fibulotomy is one of the favorite answers for when compartment syndrome is there in the leg, multiple compartments when they are injured. So once you do this incision, then definitely you can decrease the pressure in all the compartments, or you can do it by a single incision, or it can do it by double incision. This is a posterior incision near the fibula, and that is the anterior incision. 2 vertical incisions, long ones, that will help in reducing. This is a medial side. You can see incision on the leg, and these are some of the muscles, gastrosoleus, that means gastrocnemius and soleus muscles. They form the what tendon? Tendoachilles. Okay, tendoachilles, and this is the nerve which you should be aware of. So these are some of the things, anatomical things which you should. So you need to open the intramuscular septum as well. So you need to decompress the compartment. That's what they say. So look for that nerve in that region, and you should try to not to cut it. Generous incision. Forearm, there will be 3 compartments. Forearm fasciotomy, this is a zigzag incision. So this is like a Henry's approach which we do for fixation of the forearm. So this is called a Henry's volar approach. So you need to protect the nerves, which are very, very important. Just because you are doing a fasciotomy, you are not allowed to cut any vessels or nerves. Even foot, we can get this. You can see the picture. The left foot is very much swollen, and the right one is the normal one, and the pulses may not be there. There may be cold, poikilosis, poikilothermia, and when you try to extend the toes, that means dorsiflex, then patient may have severe pain, that is pain and passive movement. Then definitely it may be that patient has compartment syndrome. So this is about the foot. So these are the incisions which can be and which are needed. One is on the medial side, and 2 more on the dorsum of the foot, because the medial through medial incision you may not be able to decompress all the compartments, because as you know, the extents are a lot of compartments are there. Here you can see in this diagram there are so many compartments, and you need to decompress each one to get a maximum benefit. So you need to have additional incisions. Even in the hand, you know, external extensor tendons, so many compartments, you need to open them up all. So all of you must have remembered this from your Cunningham days. That is dissection manual during your anatomy days. Now I think it has become clear for you, Cunningham. So these are the incisions which you may need to give in decompressing the hand. The diagram here, thenar, hypothenar muscles from olar, and on the dorsum you see two vertical incisions, linear. And thigh, you need to open medial and lateral, maybe both sides. So compartments, as I told you, it can occur anywhere in the body. Please remember that. And that may be a PG entrance question. So that's a bonus for you guys. So hand, thenar, hypothenar muscles, I think most of you remember thenar muscles, hypothenar muscles, and it can occur in the buttock as well. The gluteal region, posterior approach, you should go and reduce the pressure. And even abdomen also it can occur, and you need to take the help of trauma surgeons. Trauma surgeons are a special branch of surgeons who deal with trauma, but you don't call surgeons who cause trauma as trauma surgeons. So there is a thin line which you should not cross. Okay, so this is delayed fasciotomy when it is done. Now they say in delayed cases also it can be done. What you should do after wound, for the wound after compartment syndrome, after fasciotomy, is a bulky compression syndrome dressing. Now once you've done the fasciotomy, you can have a compression dressing so that the muscle should assume original proportions. Now it is ballooned out, so it has to come back to its original position. Then only the wound can be sutured or some cover can be applied. And vacuum assisted closure, which we have seen, we need a keep a drain inside vacuum, and it is attached to a machine which will suck all the fluid which is collected, which will provide a vacuum there so that the tissues will collapse and get back to their original dimensions. So the wound closure will become easy after a bit of time. So how to cover the wounds? There are so many things which we have. Absorbent dressing should be there, because the collection of fluid should not be there. If you apply a non-absorbent, then the collection which is there will be there on the surface, macerating them. If it is an absorbent dressing, then it will, by capillary action, that will come out and the wound becomes dry. And these are some of the things which can be used. And wound should not be closed immediately after your fasciotomy. Okay, and cover has to be provided as early as possible. Once the wound becomes normal, then you should provide. Split thickness graft here. They have in this photograph. This is the split thickness graft. Fasciotomy wound is covered by, and this is a mesh graft. This is the incision and mesh graft they have applied with relaxing incisions so that there is no pressure at the wound now. So complications can be there after fasciotomy. So these are some of the complications which can occur after fasciotomy. But yeah, we need to lean towards the lesser evil. Loss of limb or some complications with fasciotomy. Definitely you go with the fasciotomy. Complications related to compartment syndrome. If you see, if you don't bother about compartment syndrome, you leave the duty in the midway without handing over the case to your colleague, then definitely it will lead to what is known as Volkmann ischemic contracture. I think all of you have read about this, heard about this during our trauma complications. So this is one of the late sequelae of compartment syndrome. And sometimes it may go, if the vascular compromise is too high, then it may lead to amputation as well. So these are some of the complications. Please note down, all these things can occur. Clottos, as the name itself goes, occurs in the foot, and chronic pain and sensory loss may be long lasting. It may lead to amputation. So there will be, if a case comes to you and it will ends up in compartment syndrome and amputation, then you are done. Because of the medico-legal complications, then it is considered as a medical negligence on your part, and it will lead to litigation. And suddenly overnight, that beggar who was injured will become Ambani overnight. He says, my daily income is so much, and because of your negligence, I lost my limb, and I am unable to earn anything. And till the other day, I was like Ambani. So you need to, your compensation is set very high. So be careful about that. So to have a normal course of events in all patients, you should have a high degree of suspicion. Not a suspicion on the patient, but high degree of suspicion on the complications, likely complications which can occur. Then once you are on the lookout for them, you can easily identify in the beginning itself and take proper precautions so that they will not end up with all those complications. And here you should start your treatment as early as you suspect your compartment syndrome, and if you diagnose them early, you can treat them early, and the complications will not progress, and the patient will be fine. And if clinically evident that those 5 P's or 6 P's, if they are there, don't waste time for measuring the pressure. So it may not be easy for you to have that manometer ready, and don't waste precious time in getting one. If you feel with your clinical examination that the patient is a patient of compartment syndrome, then just open the compartment, because the compartment what all needs is just a fasciotomy, which is a safe surgery, reliable and very, very effective. And the only treatment for compartment syndrome, it's the only treatment, as we have already seen, it is fasciotomy and fasciotomy. Okay, so that is all guys about this compartment syndrome, and hope all of you must have enjoyed your festival times. And don't I should have told you this before festivals, but even small gatherings are very, very dangerous. That's what the CDC has come out, because once it is only 5 to 6 people, close friends, close relatives, then we don't take that mandatory precautions of having a mask and physical distancing and all. So there is every chance that you may be a bit careless and may get infection from them, or you infect them. So to tell you that not to be so complacent, even I'm here alone in this room, and you guys are away, online class. Even with that, I want to show you that you should be careful. That means whatever measures you take, they should be adequate. That's why you should cover your hair whenever you go out. Cover your have your mask. See, I have 2 masks. One is a normal cloth mask, and on top of that a surgical mask and one glove, so that whenever I am operating on this computer, which others have definitely touched, and I'm definitely sure that they didn't bother to wash their hands or wash the keys of this computer before and after their use. So I need to take my own precautions, and I am doing that. And this is my hand wash, which all of you, I know most of you are carrying it when you are attending college, and do that even at home. Maybe you never know what all the surfaces you touch routinely. Just make sure that you just wipe them clean, just to make you aware of all these things. So it's not pleasant to have COVID positive, knowing so much about it and being in the profession and getting it is, I feel insulted. I feel stupid. So